Well, hey, Michael, how are you?
Oh, living the dream.
I
Living
was
the
just saying,
dream.
you're living the dream. We're all living a nightmare. I want to know what people are dreaming about or what they're doing when they're waking up. First thing, hey everybody, I probably should welcome you to the show, Protect and Serve, with Maya May and Michael.
Yeah, part due.
We were just talking before the show just about how much of an absolute shit show everything has been this week. We've witnessed everything from masked federal agents shoving and injuring reporters outside of New York City's immigration court at 26 Federal Plaza. A photojournalist. Did you see the photo in the on a stretcher with
Yeah.
the
Yep.
neck
Getting
brace
pushed
on?
out of the elevator for I'm not exactly sure what. And again, we're talking about that more, the lack of accountability within this agency. Similar to the agent that pushed the wife to the ground after her husband was detained and then taken away, only to temporarily be relieved of his assignment. And then I think within 24, 36 hours, he's back to full duty. Apparently, that was enough time to do a complete and thorough investigation into his actions and clear him of any wrongdoing and put him back out in the field.
Yeah, and to refresh everyone, this was the one where like the child was present. The mom is crying, and it was so intense. And obviously, the news cycle moves so quickly that people have already moved on to the next atrocity. But this was something where it felt like for a brief moment there was going to be accountability. What should have happened in a situation like that, Mike?
I mean, traditionally, had one of my colleagues done something similar to that, first they would have been relieved of duty. They would have been placed on administrative duties, if not just revoked of their police powers, gun and badge removed, and then told to go home. That, at least in my experience, would have been the more likely scenario. The investigation probably would have played out over the weeks and months ahead. But given the fact that it all was laid out right there for you in living color on camera, uh, I don't know how that agent escaped being terminated, because that's certainly what would have happened to me or at any time during my career as a police officer in Washington, D.C.
But then going back several months ago, there was a morale issue that I was reading about in ICE, and that people are feeling they're working too many hours, they're ridiculed and hated by large amount of America, and so is it well, we can't replace this guy with anyone else? Like, what does this say to potential recruits that you can just throw somebody to the ground, right? 2 weeks in a row, 3 weeks in a row. I mean, it's just happening over and over again. Like 26 Federal Plaza is basically a staging ground of police brutality at this point. What does that say to people who are thinking about joining because they're on this whole recruiting blitz right now?
Yeah, no, I see two types of people that are joining ICE at this moment. There are those that are you know predisposed to violence, that celebrate the opportunity to go and join a federal agency and beat up on human beings. And I mean, listen, that I'm not going to deny that there weren't those people in the ranks of my department and other departments that I worked with, but they really were like few and far between. I'm talking about maybe less than 1% of the total officers, there, and they typically didn't last long. Um, this is an agency that invites that type of behavior. And then I see, the $50,000 bonus. I mean, to most Americans, $50,000 signing bonus, that type of money is life changing.
Mhm.
And so you see a lot of people who are willing to ignore the unconstitutional and inhumane policies of this agency for blood money, for
Well,
for their 30 pieces of silver.
I was gonna say, it's not your former profession that is the only thing that's guilty of that. Comedians are right now performing in Saudi Arabia despite all sorts of human rights abuses, and so I'm a little bit disappointed in some of my peers as well. So, oh God, money talks. Apparently, it's just how much you have to buy a soul for these days, and I guess to slam somebody to the ground at Federal Plaza, it's a $50,000 bonus for that. But also in California, did you see the 80-year-old that they threw to the ground at the car wash?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, and I do think it's important, at least in this moment, every time I talk about law enforcement activity in this country, I mean, there is a conversation to be had about traditional law enforcement and, the fact that they are not above reproach and reform. But then there is this whole other animal that we refer to as ICE, and this is an agency which, and obviously we're going to get into it in this program, talking with Frank Figliuzzi, who's a former counterterrorism specialist with the FBI, and then my buddy Glenn Kirschner, who I actually worked alongside of. He was a federal prosecutor in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And before that, he was with JAG Corps.
This is great for me. It's like a Law and Order episode, only we're in it. How much fun.
It's great for me too. I like hanging out with former colleagues. But yeah, I mean, ICE it's an agency that is lawless. It is acting outside of the confines of, the rule of law, outside of the confines of the Constitution. Many of its agents are, engaging in what I believe is state-sponsored violence, and there is zero accountability. I mean, you can't even get a member of Congress to go in and inspect their facilities across the country without being threatened with arrest or assault. Let alone the average citizen, U.S. citizen that might get detained by ICE, or U.S. citizen that may be protesting one of these facilities peacefully, like we've seen countless times, and be thrown to the ground, assaulted, sprayed with tear gas and pepper spray, and have no recourse. I mean, I've now spoken to dozens of agencies across the country who have told me that when people come to complain, file complaints against ICE agents, that they take the report as a local police department, but ICE refuses to cooperate with them in identifying any of the agents that may or may not have been present at these specific events.
And so when the people who are supposed to be enforcing the law are breaking the law, it makes people who are supposed to be following the law feel a little bit helpless. And this is something now that we're seeing across the board. And we talked about this before the show, this is kind of how policing always worked in Black communities. Uh, Now it's just happening in broad daylight in many communities everywhere, where there's plenty of people with cell phones to tape these images and broadcast them all over the internet. But this is a reality that Black people have been living. I was talking to my mom about this, who grew up in Albany, New York, and so she sent me this photo, and this is her high school. Like, she was there that day. And these are cops. They sent in the SWAT team, several students. These are high school students who were protesting. And these kids, like, I think 2 people ended up in the hospital. And I said to my mom, I was like, do you know him? And she's like, oh, yeah, that's Simon. And she said it so casually. And so the thing I want to point out to people is that what we're seeing now is what Black people have been complaining about this entire time. And so lessons can be learned by asking the Black community how we survive this, because that's a lot of the questions that we're getting online right now. I don't know if you saw some of the comments, Mike, but people are like, we don't want to just hear about, we want to learn how to stop this. Like, we know what's happening. We see what's happening. how do we stop this? And so I don't know if you've got any ideas or if we should ask our guests that, but I would love to know because I feel like our hands are tied. As you pointed out, we have elected representatives, elected officials who are being prosecuted right now. It's McIver, I think she is, in Jersey, who had visited the
Yep.
ICE facility. Yeah.
The mayor. I mean, I looked it up today. I was just kind of perusing, and there's been more than 36 state and local officials who have been arrested by ICE for protesting at their facilities. And some of them were even charged with incitement, which is absolutely bizarre to me. Again, they don't ever release any of the details as an agency or give any press conferences when they arrest, elected officials. But now we have state and local officials. We have judges that have been arrested. We have had a sitting, was it U.S. congressman who was shoved to the ground violently by ICE agents for attending a press conference.
And daring to ask a question
Daring
at
to
a
ask
press
a question.
conference.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is a thing. You just listed off so many abuses of power. And it's like the boiling frog situation because it's been a complete and total onslaught, but people are starting to get used to it. It's starting to become our new normal, which is the one thing that we had all warned about for months is like, let's not let this be the new normal. But if the human brain can only take so much before it's forced to adapt. And so that's my fear is when I see somebody get thrown to the ground over and over again, zero accountability, it becomes normalized for the agents, but it also becomes normalized for the people who are witnessing it. And there are some people, apparently it seems, who can't even be bothered because I feel like people should be in the streets at this point.
Yeah, I think that, that it's funny. I was watching an interview with Nancy Pelosi the other day, and that was her expectation as well. But I will tell you from personal experience, never underestimate the vast majority of Americans' inability to empathize with, with their neighbors' lived experience. And I always point to January 6th. You would have thought that in any other time period in humankind, you would have thought that would have been the off ramp to MAGA and to this administration. But somehow it has, I think, inspired the administration to do a lot of the things that you're seeing now in Trump 2.0. It was not the off ramp that I would have expected it to be. And in a lot of ways, it garnered more support for the movement.
I was going to say, it's a lot of people are going, oh, with the 1776 insignias and flags that they had up, like for them, it was the beginning, not the end. It was like, this is our revolution, and it is feeling more and more violent day by day, and the whole stand back and stand by. When he said that, I assumed that one day it would be the Proud Boys who are out and harassing and terrorizing communities, but to see that it is, as you mentioned, state sanctioned violence, and it's coming from like our tax dollars are paying for this.
Yeah.
The big ugly bill is paying for this. These bonuses, bonuses to harass communities. And so I don't know how we're going to get out of this. And so I'm hoping our guests can shed some light on a little bit of what's going on and what we can maybe do legally. I don't want to say what we can do illegally because, but at this point, I'm like, there are no bad ideas in brainstorming, y'all. So get out.
These are former law enforcement officials. We'll have that portion the next episode.
the things that we can do illegally.
Yeah.
Yeah, like give us the scale of things. Like if what is this is as long as that just is like a misdemeanor with like 1 year, like we just need like the scale of possibility of things that we can do. So with all that, Visa, let's bring in, I think we have both Glenn and Frank with us. Amazing. Hello, gentlemen. Welcome to Protect and Serve.
Good evening.
Good to be with you.
For everybody,
yeah, go ahead, Maya.
I was going to say, for everybody who doesn't know, well, you can introduce, you work with Glenn. I'll let you can introduce Glenn.
Yeah, so Glenn, you were with JAG Corps for how long?
6.5 years active duty.
And then Glenn and I worked together. Glenn was a prosecutor at the United States Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C. for more than 20 years.
Yeah, 24 years. I did a hard 30 as a Fed, and then I decided to take my retirement.
And
but this is not, Mike, this is not what I had on my bingo card in retirement.
Who are you telling? I should be 6 months away from retirement, moving to a state that doesn't tax, my federal income, and living in a trailer by the ocean somewhere.
So sorry, gentlemen, you've been called to duty. We need you. I wanted to be doing stand-up, and look what I'm doing, talking about police brutality with a bunch of cops and former feds and all sorts of things. So, hey, we're all in it together.
And Frank, I love your backdrop. Is this a new addition? I've seen it now in the last couple of times, or is this
So first, before I talk about my backdrop, let me just make a comment on what you guys have just said, which is that none of us expected to be doing what we're doing, right? And that is a bright spot in a rather dark picture, because we feel compelled to do this. We could be doing something else, but we can't. We feel compelled to do this. And so that actually, it should be energizing for many people who I know are listening to us right now and also are doing things that they never thought they'd be doing to try and support democracy. As for supporting something, my artwork behind me, whenever you see me on, is from a local artist in Tucson, Arizona, Diana Medeiros. I get nothing in return. She gives me some free on-loan triptychs to hang. And sometimes when you see me on at night, I actually get social media comments from people saying, Frank, what is the digital magic that turns the daytime backdrop into a nighttime backdrop? And of course, the secret is Diana Medeiros painted a nighttime backdrop for me, so that I just hang up at night. So no digital magic occurring here.
Yeah, I don't think between the three of us, we could work any digital magic.
No.
No.
So, gentlemen, it feels like the frog has boiled. The frog is belly up in the pot. Can we talk a little bit about what we're seeing now compared to maybe what we even thought we were going to see? Because I know people were prepared. We read Project 2025. People knew that things were going to escalate. But Glenn, has it escalated more than you thought at a faster rate?
More and more quickly. We all knew what Project 2025 held in store. I testified before Congress. My job was to take apart the part of Project 2025 that dealt with the attack on the independence of the Department of Justice. I had I'm not going to say pleasure, but I had the experience of testifying to Jim Jordan's weaponization committee, bit of a clown show there. But we saw it coming, but I don't think we had any sense of how horrific it would be, how quickly they would implement the kind of, you all have both used the term state-sponsored violence. This is state-endorsed violence. And we keep asking ourselves, what can we do when the cops are acting like the criminals? There are no other cops to call in, right? We do have state law enforcement, and I know some of the governors are stepping up and beginning to meet the urgency of the moment, the Newsoms, the Pritzkers, but it's not enough. I think all of the blue states need to band together and get even more aggressive and, frankly, more defiant. But, you've both asked several times over, as have I, as has Frank, what can we do? What can we do? I really think at this point, because we have a Department of Justice that has zero legitimacy, they're now indicting Donald Trump's enemies without evidence to support the indictment. I hope we can talk about points of light at some point tonight, because there is a point of light emanating from the Trump-induced darkness surrounding the vindictive Comey prosecution, in my opinion. But it's really up to all of us now, right? We are we have to take this last stand, and we have to rise up. And it's got to be, as autocracy experts say, 3.5% of the citizenry standing up to the dictator that can topple the dictator politically. So what we need to do is get out there every time we see a federal law enforcement officer engaged in excessive force, abusing the constitutional rights, abusing the Fourth Amendment rights of folk. We have to be out there. We have to be out there peacefully. Don't even throw a sandwich at a police officer. Don't do it, because, that's an unconsented to touching. It's a battery, a form of an assault. Don't do it. Remain peaceful. I always think about the folks marching across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. They had to remain peaceful, even though I'm sure they saw it coming. They saw the nightsticks and the dogs. We see the tear gas and the rubber bullets. But we have to remain peaceful. Let them engage in overreach and excess and abuse. I don't want to be cracked in the head with a nightstick, but I'm willing to be, if it means standing up to the lawlessness of a runaway, corrupt Department of Justice and law enforcement agencies. And I think if they engage in those kind of abuses, it will actually galvanize the opposition and make us stronger. It doesn't sound like much of a plan. Go out there and get the hell kicked out of us.
I was going to say
for democracy. It doesn't sound like much of a plan, but listen, no one person is going to save us. If the Dems could have saved us, they would have saved us by now. There's no one prosecutor, no one judge, no one special counsel is going to save us. It's up to us. That's what it boils down to.
Yeah. So, Frank, I have a question for you, because you were talking about earlier how, the three of us or four of us now ended up here without ever expecting to be engaging in this way, to be talking about, an administration that is acting so lawlessly. We should all be in our respective professions at this point. The International Association of Chiefs of Police this week called for the arrests of people and their prosecutions of people who use their platforms to push for violent rhetoric.
Yeah.
This is a relatively feckless body, at least in my experience, when it comes to addressing issues like this. And it's not typically the tone that you would hear from a bunch of chiefs of police across the country. But now you have them speaking up and speaking out in this way, which I think is certainly needed. Where the hell is everybody else?
Yeah, so if we want to talk about a bright spot, and you can look at this two ways, but I had to jump on to Substack Live today on my account to talk about this report. NBC News, Tom Winter, really put in proper context, and what I think is, at least in my 25 years in law enforcement, an unprecedented statement from the IACP. For those who don't know the IACP, it is the largest Chiefs of Police Association in the United States. It's international in nature. Inside the US, 38,000 members. I don't know a chief of police who's not a member of the IACP. I've attended their conventions frequently when I was an FBI executive. Okay, what did they say that's getting everybody's attention? Well, they've said they can't take it anymore. That the level of threats in our communities across the country that are incited by rhetoric. This is their language, not mine. And they, by the way, in an unprecedented fashion, when you talk about that they're calling for prosecution of those who incite violence, they include politicians and public figures.
Yeah.
And this is an apolitical policing organization. They're saying that we can't do everything our communities need at one time. We cannot respond to the level of threats we have right now of violence against people in our community, namely those who speak out, politicians, judges, they cite school threats that are out of control. and comma, we can't at the same time respond to all the 9/11 calls for service. We can't do this. And so they're calling for people to basically shut up in terms of their violence inciting rhetoric. I've not seen this before from this organization. It's not that we're surprised. We know rhetoric incites violence. We know that. But for this group to say it and the warning, we're not sure we've got control of this. In fact, we don't think we do. That, you know, and one leader of a state police organization says he's got 100 investigators assigned only to threats, primarily to school threats. That and it's what they're not able to do that's concerning them. So what do we take from this? And in terms of what, Frank, why are you saying this is a bright spot? Well, because this organization chose to speak out about this. And they said, look, we're not political, but we think politicians that incite violence should be prosecuted. And so there we are. What am I telling people to do about this? Send cut and paste this NBC News article or the IACP statement and send it first to your local chief of police and go, hey, did you sign on to this? Are we experiencing this? Because it also talks about the mental health component. Are you losing grant money for mental health? People to respond embedded in police departments. It's been working. I have chiefs telling me money's being cut. Send it to your state legislators and ask them, what are we doing to support our police? And send it to your governor and say, hey, governor, I think you've got a budget surplus for us. Fantastic. What are we doing with our budget surplus to augment our law enforcement and our mental health resources right now? Because our chiefs of police in our state are saying they can't handle this.
I love that, Frank, because you're focusing on what people can control and what they can do. We can't control the rhetoric of the Trump administration. We can't control what people are doing on social media. The algorithms are out of control and pushing all of this violent rhetoric to the top. And I'm sure that's probably why we're seeing a lot of the threats at the schools. And so a lot of people in our comments are asking us, what can we do? And so thank you, reminding people, focusing on what you can control, and that the state legislatures are there to serve the people, and hopefully it will be a line to protect us, because it does feel like we have a pandemic of violence happening right now. And it makes me nervous because everything now, they're pushing out so many people who were, I come from the side of things where people are like, all cops are bad. So I'm sure you've heard it. I feel like right now Pete Hegseth's saying FAFO and then waiting for people to understand that. And like, all cops are bad. What's happening now with these loyalists that are coming in and pushing out people, because if anybody stands up and speaks up within the department, they become a target, I'm assuming. So what can somebody who is in law enforcement do to make a difference?
I'll take that first. Look, you took an oath, if you're a law enforcement officer, to protect and preserve the Constitution. You need to take that more seriously than you've ever taken it before. And many police departments post George Floyd adopted an internal policy of if you don't report your colleague who is violating civil rights or using excessive force, we're going to investigate you. And you can certainly, we learned from the George Floyd aftermath, you could certainly be prosecuted for inaction if you're witnessing that. So it's time to step up to your oath and take that seriously and not condone those who violate their oath and embarrass your agency, quite frankly. The other thing I think officers need to do is really rehash their policy and departments on the peaceful, as Glenn alluded to, the peaceful exercise of freedom of speech and assembly, because that's what it's all about. Do not if you're protesting out there, and I know a lot of our viewers and listeners are, do not hand this administration or your police department an excuse to start busting heads. Don't do it. The Martin Luther King's civil disobedience philosophy is at play here. Mass arrests, fine. Be prepared. But do not hand this administration any excuse. They'll take it.
Do you think, Michael, because I hear this, you as having been on the inside, this idea of not taunting cops, not put does that really in practice, is that possible? Because it feels like across the board, there's always going to be that one person who's instigating. Or even possibly, I see a lot of videos and they say like, hey, there might be cops in the crowd who are instigating.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, 20 years of law enforcement, the idea of, plainclothes police officers or undercover police officers inside of a crowd, antagonizing or instigating violence is just something that I never saw, never experienced. That being said, I don't like the antagonistic behavior, not just from, when I was a police officer, which obviously I didn't like it, but flip, to the other side. And as somebody who is outraged by a lot of the behavior, specifically of, the agency known as ICE, and the way that their agents are behaving towards the general public. I still, when I have gone out to some of these protests, won't taunt the individual officers. Stand there, be counted, be seen. Some people chant, some people, whatever, but directed at the policy, not at the individual agents. Because at the end of the day, I mean, while some of these individuals are acting egregiously and using excessive force and outside of the law, the vast majority of them are not. And so, I think it's important that we not do more to create this idea that the whole world is against that agency, because it only encourages, speaking from experience, it only encourages them to act more violently, in anticipation of violence.
Right. And I feel like people are so frustrated and so angry at seeing the Constitution get trampled over and over again. Glenn, what constitutional lines do you see being crossed right now?
Well, the Fourth Amendment doesn't seem to be having its day with respect to mass immigration sweeps. Of course, we had a judge in California rule that there was, quote, a mountain of evidence that there were systematic abuses of the Fourth Amendment rights of folks that were being chased down, rounded up, thrown to the ground, with really zero articulable suspicion, never mind probable cause. I mean, the Fourth Amendment, provides that the right of the people to be secure in our persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. A seizure is a fancy word for an ICE agent grabbing somebody, putting them on the ground, and demanding to see their papers. And the courts have said that you don't satisfy the Fourth Amendment's requirements just because somebody looks Hispanic, just because they may be speaking Spanish or speaking English with a Spanish accent, just because they might be in the vicinity of where day laborers are congregating. But a judge concluded there was a mountain of evidence that is exactly what ICE was doing. So the Fourth Amendment doesn't seem to be having a day. The good news is we have federal judges all around the country, many appointed by Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, lots appointed by Democrat presidents. And they're ruling in a way that honors the Constitution. And that's good. And, God help us if the federal courts begin to fall, because it's kind of the only branch of government we have left to protect us. Congress has laid down, certainly the Republican majority in Congress has laid down and given it all over to dear leader. The executive branch is being run and I don't use this term flippantly, as a RICO organization, racketeer influenced and corrupt organizations. I prosecuted, part of the largest RICO case we ever brought in the history of Washington, D.C. And I know a RICO organization when I see one. And that's what Donald Trump is doing. He's running a corrupt organization that is the executive branch of the federal government. So what we have right now is the judiciary. It's holding strong for the most part. And everybody, when I talk about the federal courts being a bright light amidst the Trump-induced darkness, everybody says, but the Supreme Court. And I'm with you. But the Supreme Court, at least in these preliminary rulings, they seem to be knocking down 100-page opinions, thoughtful legal analysis by trial court judges and court of appeals judges, and they don't even tell the courts why. Judge Lamberth commented about it in his opinion the other day, where he said, I'm moving in the direction of contempt for Carrie Lake. That made my heart sing a little bit. But they're not even telling the judges what they're doing wrong. They're just saying, yeah, we've absorbed hundreds of pages of well thought out opinions that you've authored. You're all wrong, and we're throwing them all out, but we're not telling you why. That's corrosive to the federal judiciary. And, I fear what keeps me up at night, if the federal courts begin to slide, in part because of the Supreme Court disrespect, then I don't know where we turn. We turn to us because we're the only ones we have.
Us, but we're being invaded. Frank, this question's for you, because what happens now that everyone apparently that opposes Donald Trump is a domestic terrorist, and he gets on stage and tells people that we're being invaded, and therefore we're now going into the cities, and we're going to use the cities as training grounds. If you're not in a uniform, we can't identify you, so we can't shoot you. So if we can figure out who you are, we're going to shoot you. Frank, what are people to do with that?
Yeah, so look, we've got to en masse exercise our freedom of speech, but I also understand that that's fraught with peril, as I said, in terms of handing this administration an excuse to get even worse. But the worst is coming. I'm convinced of that. I've actually advocated for the argument that Trump is trying to develop a national police force. Yeah. That in effect, what you're doing with ICE, particularly when you see, even at the Bureau, at FBI, you're seeing this lowering of standards to get more people in the pipeline that they can kind of coerce and compel to action with their own agenda, shortening training at the academy from what used to be 16 to 20 weeks now down to 8 weeks. The product of that is going to be more violation of civil rights, more violation of the Fourth and Fifth Amendment. You're going to see that. The other thing is the unique selection of ICE, right? He could have said, I'm going to turn the FBI into this giant national police force. He chose the Homeland Security Department and ICE. Part of the problem with that, and please understand, I'm in no way making excuses for ICE agents and their appalling behavior. However, understand that their training is different from what I got in the FBI. Border Patrol, Customs, ICE, HSI is better trained, certainly for general civilian law enforcement. But, they're trained for administrative arrests. They have powers and authority at or near the border that I never had as an FBI agent. In fact, quite honestly, there were times in my FBI career where we needed to get something done fast at, say, an airport or near a border. We'd pick up the phone and call Customs, ICE, Border Patrol, who had astounding authorities for search and seizure that we simply didn't have. We had to go get a search warrant. They did not. They make administrative arrests. We make criminal arrests. So their mindset is different, and I think that Trump understands that loosely, that he needs those kinds of draconian attempts, even when you're not near a border. So what's to be done here? One of the things, and I'm eager to hear Glenn on this as a former prosecutor. lawsuits against individual agents, you have to make it painful to violate the Constitution. And it's very, very difficult. There's something called a Bivens action, but it's very difficult to sue an agency or an agent who's acting in their official capacity. And in the old days, when we honored the Constitution and the rule of law, occasionally the Department of Justice would say, this agent, this DOJ agent, FBI or other, has acted outside the scope of his or her employment. We're kind of washing our hands of this conduct, the slamming to the ground, the beating at the head. I don't think that's ever coming, unfortunately, from this administration. Oh, yeah, the guy who busted the head was outside scope of employment. But I do think civil lawsuits, as Glenn said, the judges are a bright spot in many cases. But trying to sue civilly, making it painful, suing individually, even supervisors who are out there of these agents, and I think brings pain to those who violate the law. I don't know, Glenn, your thoughts on any success odds on that?
You can't win the case you don't bring. And we need, like you say, Frank, we need to make it painful. Everybody who gets slammed to the ground should file suit. If they have a lawyer who, can reasonably, draft a complaint that doesn't make a complete mockery of the system. Yes, it's hard to sue government employees because generally we all get a healthy dose of immunity of one form or another. And that's the way it should be. I always use the example that if you're an IRS auditor and you're reviewing tax returns and, you come across somebody who took a big fat deduction the law didn't allow, and you have to call them out on it and say, look, you got to pay back taxes and penalties and interest. If the citizen who is aggrieved and who wouldn't be aggrieved gets to sue and tie up in court the IRS employee all day, every day, that's a recipe for disaster with respect to the functioning of the federal government. But when you're slamming 90-year-old people and 80-year-old people and anybody to the ground for what looks like, I was going to drop the F-bomb, what looks like sport, then sue them.
Yeah.
You know what? You may not win. A judge may rule what? That's within the scope of the official duties of a masked ICE agent throwing an 80-year-old to the ground. No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's excessive. And you can't win the suit you don't bring. So everybody should be bringing these suits because by and large, all federal court judges, with the exception maybe of Aileen Cannon and a couple of others, have been honest brokers of the law and the Constitution. And so that's one available avenue for us. Everybody get into court when your rights are violated.
Yeah. I can tell you as an FBI agent, one of our worst nightmares was the possibility that we'd be declared outside the scope of our employment for something we did. That's a nightmare. And you're on your own hanging. And
I for people who don't really know how qualified immunity works, because I spend the better part of my day talking to people about why qualified immunity is actually a good thing. And Glenn, you just laid it out. But when I was a cop with the Metropolitan Police Department, if I interacted with a citizen, and let's just use the excessive force example. Let's say I used force on an individual and it was deemed that it was not reasonable and it was outside of the scope of, my official capacity as a law enforcement officer. That qualified immunity no longer applies to me. And so I am now personally responsible for, whatever, if this lawsuit, goes and I'm, there's a judgment of however much money, I am now responsible to pay that myself. Whereas, if I was found to have acted in accordance with departmental guidelines, then I would receive representation from our department's general counsel. And, if there was a determination of fault and, some type of a fine or fee assessed, that the department would cover that. The problem I think we're seeing here is, at least what I'm hearing from people, is that ICE is not cooperating to identify their agents. I've talked to law enforcement officers all across the country, or law enforcement agencies across the country, contacts there who have told me that, yes, they have had citizens come in and file complaints and produce video footage of, what appears to be some pretty egregious actions on behalf of ICE agents. And then when they take a police report and reach out to ICE, ICE refuses to, comment on even, who may or may not have been present at that particular event, if they even return the phone call at all.
And that's where you go to the C word, Michael. Contempt. Contempt.
Yeah.
I did a video today. I'm not that bad. I did a video today about Royce Lamberth, right? I spent 6 months in his courtroom trying that RICO case, and I feel like I know him well. You know how many government officials, including cabinet secretaries and agencies, he's held in contempt for violating court orders or for not providing the kind of information that he orders them to provide, identify an officer? The courts have been great, but they have been a little bit too reluctant in holding this administration's feet to the fire. Maybe it's for fear that they're going to encourage the administration to begin openly defying all court orders, and the courts don't really have an army to enforce their orders. They do have the U.S. Marshal Service, though, which is a battle that is probably going to be fought sometime in the near future. But contempt, that is what contempt is for. If you have a governmental agency that is literally hiding out in its basement the identity of somebody who may have violated the civil rights or assaulted a citizen or a person, a human being.
Yeah, I think we could probably bankrupt them with lawsuits. So I think that's a perfect place to end, because we've been covering quite a bit, and I think we've covered enough that the people feel armed with, I don't even want to say armed. I'm starting to police my own language. I'm like, the people have the information that they need in order to resist, not even fight back. I'll say resist. But Glenn, Frank, thank you so much for joining us. I hope everybody is feeling a bit more optimistic after hearing that it's not all lost, that the judges are there still for us to enforce in some way the constitutional rights that we have. So use the rights, people. Michael, do you have anything you wanted to add before you run?
No, it's just good to see both you guys again. And of course, Maya, lovely to see you, man.
As well. Thanks, guys.
Stay safe.
Take care.